So in my Discord, I have a channel where I walk through a lot of plugins that I'm using on a regular basis, and this was one that I threw in, and I talked a bit about how I use it in my mastering chain, and then that sort of progressed into me feeling like I just wanted to make a video about my mastering chain as a whole, because I really don't feel like I've done that in a long time. So yeah, in this video, I'm going to be walking through how I master a track from start to finish. I'll show you all my plugins and my thought process behind all of them. One thing I will say is I'm not going to go into all the details because I really feel like I learned a lot from this mastering class. It's from edmprod.com. Nick from Panorama Mixing and Mastering put the course together. It is really well put together, and I already knew how to master before I took this class, but I did pick up a lot of things that I'm using regularly in my workflow now from this course. And I just kind of feel like it would be slimy to not at least shout them out, and also kind of like not divulge everything. So feel free to leave questions or comments down below, but if you have like any sincere questions and it feels like I just kind of can't answer them, it's because they put a lot of time and effort into this course and I don't want to just give away the content that they have. I highly recommend checking these guys out. Also, if you look up at the top here of the screen, I just bought Minimeter. I don't normally use that specifically while I'm mastering. You can. It's just I thought it would make the video look cooler. But okay, I'm going to show you guys how I mastered my track, Overwhelm. And how I master this track is basically how I master every track. So it actually starts out in the mixing process. I will have two reference mixes that I know I'm wanting to get sonically close to. And I'll bring them into Metric AB by ADPTR. I have it because I have the Plugin Alliance bundle, but you can also just buy it. So when this button is blue, it's playing my mix. And when I hit B, it goes to whatever reference mix I have queued up. For this song, I had a couple of Gable Price and Friends songs that I wanted to reference, which I'm not going to play for copyright reasons. In the mixing stage, I will just kind of go through and from a general vibe standpoint, see where is my mix leaning. I'll go through all of my creative moves as a mixer, but then I will have a very serious sit down where I will compare my own mix and the reference mixes and be like, okay, is my high end leaning in a certain direction that my reference mixes aren't? Or is my low end about where it should be compared to my reference mixes? This is also the reason why I like having two reference mixes. I feel like if you just pick one, you have a tendency to sort of put blinders on and be like, oh, I need to make it just match this reference mix. Whereas I feel like when you have two, you can have this gradient range that you're trying to find in between the two of them. And just to clarify, when I'm in the mixing stage and this is like not rendered out, really the only things on my master chain is like an Ableton limiter that I'm gaining up until I'm hitting about 3 dB of gain reduction at the loudest part of the song. The reason I like throwing my limiter on my unmastered mix when I'm in the stage is because A, I've found that when I throw a limiter on and actually bring my track up to volume the way that I'm going to when I actually master it with my mastering chain, I notice personally a lot of the balancing stuff that I've done tends to shift a bit. Like you might notice your vocal being really present or not present enough once you're actually throwing it into a limiter. I also feel like a lot of the automation moves that I make tend to be more informed. There have been several points where I've tried automating certain elements in and out in choruses and stuff like that. But then when I throw a limiter on, all those automation moves are like not accurate. Like I need to almost go back in and like lessen the amount that I'm boosting them, or I can't hear them at all. Also, I feel like if you're going to use reference mixes, if there's such a massive volume difference, it can really trick your ears into thinking your mix is either not where it needs to be or that it's leaning in this certain direction tonally, when really it's not loud enough, it's not compressed enough, and you're not able to judge those differences accurately. When you're going through this process of trying to compare it to a master, you really just need to get the volume up and see like what are the broad stroke problems that you're going to have. All right, everybody says it's best to fix it in the mix, but very few people talk about the process of how you find problems in the mix and how you fix them. And for me personally, the way that I've gotten the most success out of it is take your mix, throw it into a limiter that's actually pushing it pretty hard the same way it will be pushing in the actual master, and see what problems are popping up. Are you getting problems where your vocal is not as loud as it is in the reference? How loud are you getting in your sub low end with like your kick? In the higher range of your low end with your bass, how much is that hitting compared to your kick? What's the general shape of the high end? Like all those things are things that you can probably tweak in your mix and get them a little bit closer. you know, it's personal preference, but I've heard a lot of people talk about how it's like, oh, you don't want to compare your unmastered mix to a mastered reference track. And I completely disagree. I feel like I get a lot when I compare my unmastered mix to a mastered reference track, because it shows me where a lot of the deficiencies are in my mix. Like if my sub low end is completely off relative to my bass, that's actually something that I would like to know and fix in my mix prior to rendering it out. And I will show you why I prefer to render my mix out. In my opinion, if you can get your mix sounding decently good compared to your reference mix with just a stock limiter on it, you're in a really good spot, honestly. After I've done all of that, I will take off that limiter and anything that I have on the master bus, and I will render it out as an audio file, because then I like to bring it into iZotope RX. And this is something I actually picked up from the mixing mastering course that I talked about at the beginning, is bringing your unmastered mix rendered out as an audio file into iZotope RX, pulling up your waveform statistics and a gain utility set to -0.2. And what we're going to do is we're just going to zoom in a lot, because iZotope RX allows you to zoom in on like individual samples. And we're just going to go through to our loudest peaks. You can just hit these little yellow guys here and it'll bring you to the highest peak point of either the right or the left. And we can see that this right here is our loudest peak. So we're just going to highlight it and then hit this render on the gain module, which will reduce it by 0.2 dB. Might do it a couple of times. And now it's no longer the highest peak point of our song. And if I hit the next biggest point, it's a completely different point of the song. And we can do this again, render it out, reduce this section by almost half a dB. Now another point in the song is the highest peak. And you can see already the advantages of this. I believe this is something he learned from Bob Katz. Like this is essentially like the most transparent way of limiting a song. You basically go in like this and you clip gain things where they need to be. So right here, I've done it for like a couple of minutes just on like the loudest points of the song. And already we've gone from a wave file where the true peak was like -2.6. And now our loudest true peak is -3.16. And it is so subtle of a move that like nobody on earth would be able to hear it. But we have gained almost half a dB of headroom with just those two moves. And then I just continue doing this for a few minutes. And this is just a really clean way of getting a little bit of extra headroom on a mix where you have a lot of really aggressive hits. I don't do this on everything. Like I don't do this on soft acoustic ballads, but if you're in like a scenario where you're doing like punk drums, you don't even necessarily want the relative like volume of those drums to change. You just want that initial hit of the transient to be a little bit softer so that you can get a little bit more headroom on your limiter. This is normally what I'm doing with that. And then after that, I'm normally just selecting everything and then gaining it down until the true peak is like -6 dB. No specific reason. I've just kind of dialed in my chain for that. And then I will bring it into my session. Something else that I might do, if I notice there's an insanely quiet section, going into a really aggressive section, what I will most likely do is go here. I didn't do this for my song just because I didn't need it, but sometimes I'll do it, is I'll add like a cut just before that, add a little bit of a crossfade. So you can boost up a quiet section of the song by like a dB up just in the clip gain, and then you don't have this weird effect where like an entire part of the song feels like it's like a little bit too quiet. You can bring it up a bit. But yeah, for Ableton, what I like to do is I'll bring in the audio file and then I'll have like a MIDI track up here at the top, and that will be like the length of the song that I choose. So whenever I'm deciding to export something as a master, I'll just click on this selection and then I'll just render it out that way. Because I'm doing so much chopping and automating tails and fade outs that I want to preserve like non-destructively, making a MIDI clip and then just selecting it whenever you want to bounce anything out, I've found to be the best solution. That is everything around it. Also, you can see this marker here called TP. I normally, when I'm in RX, I make note of the section of the song that has like the highest true peak point and the loudest moment of momentary LUFS, which is like average volume. Because then whenever I'm adjusting things that are very like input sensitive, like compression or things like that, if I want to see how hard it's hitting it, I can just go to the loudest true peak point. This snare here was the loudest hit. So I have this point so I can just play a little bit leading up to it. But yeah, here, let me throw on the limiter. I will show you guys what I'm doing with it near the end, but I want it to be at volume so you guys can just hear what I'm doing. So here is what the unmastered song sounds like just at volume. So the first thing that I normally do is correction. So there's a couple of these soothe profiles that I like, Master by Goodwin 1 and Balanced at the Grammy Awards. And sometimes if I have a really aggressive song that's like the mid-range is just kind of like stupid in your face, I'll bring these guys up until they're going a little bit. Just the gingerest little bit of reduction. I am not like going really heavy-handed with them. I just find that instead of doing a bunch of like intricate EQ work where I'm notching a bunch of stuff out, if I just throw those on, I know I'm good. So then I'm using Pro Q3. If these look like extreme moves to you, notice I'm on like 3 dB scale. If I go to the regular like 12, they're actually not that big moves at all. So just a high-pass filter at 6 dB per octave. I then have like some low mid-range cut that I'm doing, so I'll just solo the band and listen for what I feel like is the most blocking frequency range, if that makes sense. Like the thing that is just kind of like in your face, it's taking up a lot of room and it's very unpleasant. I'll normally just cut that by a dB or so. And then half a dB boost wherever I feel like I want some more presence, a little bit of a boost on the sides to increase the stereo width. That guy is just there to like keep things from curving a little bit too much. And then sometimes I'll throw in a presence boost up in the high end. I didn't really feel like doing it here. I think I did it more at the end of the chain. For this video, it's in linear phase medium mode. I am normally turning it up to high or very high. And for anybody who doesn't understand why you use linear phase, I'm gonna open up Pro Q inside of Plugin Doctor, which is basically just a plugin that shows you under the hood what a plugin is doing. So if I take this EQ and boost it at 160 hertz, this plugin is like reflecting what it's doing to the frequency range. But if we go to the phase, you can see it's not just messing with the EQ, it's also messing with the phase. And this is, to be clear, not a problem with Pro Q at all. This is literally just like how digital EQs work. 99% of all EQs that you use are going to have some general phasing thing that they do. So this is a Bell EQ curve, and you can see it's messing with the phase a little bit, but where you notice it a lot is when I change to a high pass filter, it really messes with it. And remember when I said I prefer a 6 dB high pass filter, is because I actually kind of like the way that a 6 dB high pass filter sounds on a master a little bit more. It doesn't feel like it's sort of cutting everything out. But also if I go from a 12 dB per octave to a 6 dB per octave, you can see that like it's almost halved the amount of like phase that it changes. Now in this mastering context, it really doesn't matter that much, but for general mixing purposes, I use 6 dB per octave most of the time on other things when I'm just generally mixing. This is normally why I'm using 6 dB per octave. But when we go to something like a brick wall, which I know a lot of mastering engineers who actually prefer using a brick wall just to control like all the low end, which there's nothing wrong with it, but you can see like the phase is like really messed up. But if we take this high pass filter that's in regular EQ mode, you can see it's really messing with the phase. But if we throw it from 0 latency to linear phase on high, you can see all of that like phasing is like gone. So when you're doing EQ stuff, really make sure you're using linear phase. This is also another reason why I personally prefer to render out my audio file and just bring it into a new session, because linear phase can really use up a lot of CPU power, and you don't want to have every plugin in your mix going while also using a linear phase EQ on your masters. Just most people's computers can't handle that. But yeah, just doing some general EQ moves. Again, linear phase is in either high or very high, and I'm using 6 dB per octave here because I just kind of like the way that it sounds a little bit more. I'm not as adverse to leaving some low end in the master. Let me show you what it sounds like with. Without. With. You're not going to hear really major changes with it because it's more of just a way to subtly control things. The next thing that I do is compression, which I basically only use this guy. This is the Kotelnikov mastering compressor from TDR. So here's how I normally approach it. I go to this really sketchy website that actually believes a lot of BS about flutes and the Schumann resonance and all this stuff. And it's a bunch of BS, but they do have a calculator that lets you take a note of the song that you're in, select your octave range, and it will give you like what that is on a frequency level. So I'll do that, input that frequency here into the high pass filter, and then set it to 6 dB per octave because I personally like having my high pass filters set on my mastering compressor so that it can like catch the snare. I honestly used to think that I didn't like compression on a master bus. Now I'm realizing it was just because it was triggering the kick all the time and it made like the low end really flubby. I will do that. I'll dial in my attack and release. Another cool thing about this plugin is you have separate releases for your peak and your average loudness. So here, let me just show you what it's doing. So I wanted to get a little bit of a pump going, but then I also wanted the release to get out of the way of the next hit. So yeah, learning your attack and release times is like golden. And if you don't feel like you understand these guys, I would highly recommend the Kush Audio video where he talks about attack and release. Because yeah, once you learn how attack and release affect like the texture of a sound, it really like it opens your mind creatively. I then use dynone from Leapwing. This is a multiband compressor, but I'm almost using it as like a parallel compressor. I really like this tonalization gentle mastering preset from the Bobcats presets. So it's basically compressing pretty aggressively all these individual frequency ranges, and then it lets you bring them up in a parallel, almost dry wet knob. So if I turn it off and then on. It just helps bring up the loudness a little bit more without just like gaining it up. Like it almost acts as like an upwards compressor. At least that's how I like using it. And then I have StandardCLIP from SIR Tools. And so with this plugin, I'm just trying to take off like 1 dB or like 2 dB max of just the top of like those snare drums or things like that. Because every little bit of headroom that you can get yourself on the limiter is like really good. So if I turn it off and on, off, on, you can hear it almost doesn't sound different from what it sounded like before, which is good because that's what I want. A lot of people will use a clipper as a way to sort of maximize loudness by just running things into it, which stylistically I'm fine with. That is like a sound of mastering that is on a lot of records that I love. But personally with my productions, I like to just use it as a way to get more headroom without necessarily audibly doing anything. Because you could see we were hitting like about -2 dB of gain reduction. So we're clipping off like the top 2 dB of the track, but when it's gain matched, you almost can't tell, which means on top of that like individual clip gaining that we did, we also have another additional like 2 dB of headroom. You can also see oversampling is turned on. For anybody who doesn't know why you would oversample. When you're doing this kind of processing on an audio file, one of the risks you run into is aliasing distortion or phase distortion, because you're almost doing this processing that is like beyond what the resolution of the track can handle. Like right now we're at 48 kilohertz, 24-bit on this guy. Essentially what we're doing is temporarily multiplying the resolution of the audio file before it does the processing and then dividing it back down to its original resolution so that when it's doing its processing, it's not adding any weird phase distortion, it's not aliasing, it's not adding any weird downward harmonics. That's why you use oversampling. I will then sometimes use this guy, not always. It depends on whether or not the track needs it or not. I will also sometimes use the slate tape machine. I think that that's a really really good vibe saturator. But yeah, just a little bit of low end saturation, maybe a little bit of air. I don't know. It depends if I'm feeling fancy. And then this is the one that I posted in my Discord. This is the Bettermaker EQ 232D, which is essentially a Pultec. So I will normally go through and find a frequency range that I think sounds a little nice. I'll boost it up a bunch. I like that one. Bring it back down. Boost it a little bit, and then attenuate it a little bit. And I'll do the exact same thing with the high end. Look for whichever one sounds the sweetest. I like that one. Attenuate it. So yeah, that's basically exactly what I do most of the time. It's like a very end of the chain color adding EQ. And then I am not afraid of compression. So I throw on another guy, townhouse bus compressor, and I'm literally throwing it in on such a gentle attack auto release. And I am just throwing it in until that needle is like barely moving at all. Not even 1 full dB. I think less than half a dB. But if I turn it off, turn it on, off, on. If anything, it just adds like a little bit of color to it that I like. If there's any plugin that I could probably go without, sometimes it would be this guy, just because end of the chain compression is normally like a very, very faint thing for me. I might even use the mix control and blend it in a little bit. And then I will come to what we've been listening to this whole time, which is our limiter. Yeah, attack and release are normally in these ranges. I might play with them a little bit. All around tends to be the style that I like the most. Transparent can be good. You just need to make sure your look ahead is dialed in right. Otherwise, it's going to like let transients through your limiter. And that's it. Sometimes I will throw on an Ozone EQ match for that reference track that I feel is closest to what I'm trying to do. So if you look at here, my reference and my actual mix are pretty freaking close from a frequency standpoint. If anything, my low end could probably be a little bit more boosted, but in terms of like where the resonant frequencies are, the high end drop off, general shape of the low end, like it's pretty darn close. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because I'm using this on like very, very fine amount. And I won't even use this on all tracks. If I feel like it's close enough, I won't even use it. But yeah, I'll record in my reference mix, normally at like the big loud part of the song that I'm trying to replicate, and then I'll track in my song without it, with it on. Like you can see here, if I boost it a lot to 100, it's like not doing that much. It's just small corrections frequency wise. So here, let me show you my mix through the limiter with all of that stuff turned off, and then I'll turn it back on. I'm so sick of feeling stable without you. And then let me turn it all on. I'm so sick of feeling stable without you. But yeah, that's what my process looks like. I will normally render out with like a negative 0.2 dB ceiling on it. And the reason that I do that is because I take my just rendered out file that's just at native like 48 kilohertz 24-bit, and then I will bring it into the batch processor inside of iZotope RX, and I have a lot of profiles that I will use to actually do my conversion. So like I have a gain module here when I'm converting it to an MP3 that also lowers lowers it by 1 dB. I have NTP, which stands for not true peak, because I will normally render out a version that doesn't have that true peak turned on with the limiter, and then I will have another version that I bounce out that does have true peak turned on, just because a lot of places like YouTube or SoundCloud, they can normally gain from some true peak. And with all of these bounces, there's a naming truncate here at the end, so it will add all the details for the master, like the resolution and the bit depth, as well as in parentheses what it's supposed to be used for at the end of it, so people can just look at it really quickly and be like, oh, okay, I need an MP3 for my press kit. Okay, this is one says press kit at the end with the parentheses, I'll use that one. So yeah, that's what my process looks like. And the main thing that I've taken away is that it's less of changing how the mix sounds. I feel like mastering engineers that are like trying to immediately change how the mix sounds are just trying to make it seem like they're doing something important, but really they should just be the little bit of varnish on the painting that's meant to format what already exists in a way that will play well in whatever place you want to put it. But on some level, I think that there is still a value to having somebody be your mastering engineer, because they are also meant to be like your quality control person. Thank you guys for watching. If you would like more in-depth process videos like this, let me know. I would love to make more of these. Again, check out the Discord. That's where this whole conversation started for this video. But yeah, I will see you guys next week.